We took a gamble buying this worn-out mid-engine Porsche Cayman and scored pretty big when we found it came with a 5-figure turbo kit already installed. And even though it was smoking pretty heavily, the problem wasn't catastrophic. It was just built-up oil and worn-out seals inside the turbocharger. It took us only around 30 minutes to pull the turbo and a couple hours to rebuild it, and for $23 in new seals and hardware along with some fresh oil, this Porsche was good to go. Well, for a few miles until the flashing check engine light showed up. And when you get a check engine light, it could mean like anything. There's no telling until you scan your codes, but when your check engine light flashes, like on our Porsche, it means the car has a more serious issue and is actively misfiring. Instead of burning up fuel in the engine, it's dumping that fuel straight to the exhaust. Even though we just fixed up our turbocharger and the car drives decently, this aftermarket kit is very likely the root of our issue. So to start things off here, let's just pull our spark plugs and hopefully that can give us an idea of what's going on here. Spark plugs on any of these Porsches that have the engines in the back, it's just not a fun job. Since they're located on the side of the engine, you got to get them from underneath. And while the lift is making our lives a lot easier, we've done them on jack stands before, and it is still a DIY job. It's something you want to DIY because the dealership charges a fortune for a remove and replace. But it just takes probably about 3 or 4 times the average amount of time that your normal top of the engine spark plug would take. Now what we're looking for in particular with these spark plugs is to see if they're fouled or if they're real oily on the ends, since we suspect oil is getting in the combustion chamber. If you do ever have to do this on your own Porsche, a variety of different sockets and extensions are going to really be helpful. I got one of them out here. Well, it's probably not the worst plug I've ever seen. There's definitely a good amount of oil on the tip, and we've already got it out. We're definitely going to just swap it for a fresh one. But before we do, we want to check out the condition of this Porsche's engine. So I've broken out our scope camera here. Number 1, we're going to check the cylinder walls for bore scoring. Number 2, we want to see the top of our piston, because if it's all oily and gross, that means that this turbo has just been pushing excess oil into the combustion chamber like we suspect. Now the cool thing about this scope camera is that it has this little knob on the side, and as I turn it, it articulates the head. So we should be able to get a really clean and stable view all around this cylinder. And just like we suspected, we've got a super oily piston. Now this car has around 100,000 miles and it's pretty normal to see some carbon buildup, but see how it's still a bit wet? That's because the oil that runs through the turbo isn't draining fast enough. It's backing up and moving past its seals. So when we get into boost, we're sending not only air, but also oil into the intake, which is making its way into the combustion chamber. And because of the horizontal cylinders on this box or engine, we have some more very clear proof, with a pool of oil sitting at the bottommost part of the cylinder. And while the amount of excess oil varied from cylinder to cylinder, the great news here is that not a single one had any bore scoring. So we've got a really solid engine here. And check this out. With the scope's articulating head, you can get a really clear look at the valves. Now, every time I show you one of these scope cameras, I always get a ton of comments asking me where you can get one, so I've dropped a link to it down in the description box, as well as the triple lens one you've probably seen me use before. This is just one of those super handy tools that's amazing to have around. It doesn't really cost all that much and has saved me a ton of time in some tricky situations. So we're going to start off by replacing all 6 plugs. Then once we get this up and running, we're going to clean this engine out so we're not just fouling our new plugs and sensors. But before we get it running, we really need a scavenge pump setup to move that oil out of the turbocharger and back where it belongs, in the pan and not inside the engine. It's real easy to spot the turbocharger on this modern Alfa Romeo engine right here. It's right up top, and off the side is our oil exit line that goes straight down, which allows gravity to just pull the oil coming out of the turbocharger back into the pan, where it will constantly be recirculated throughout this engine. But in this Porsche, our turbocharger is mounted much lower. It's right here. So the line that comes off of it, while it slopes down initially, very quickly you'll see it runs parallel with the bottom of the car, and it actually has to angle itself back up to return into the engine, which is right here. That's the bottom of the oil pan. Since gravity can't really help us in this situation, we're going to need a pump to help move this oil along. Now, if you go online and look for a scavenge pump setup, you're going to find a bunch from boutique brands, and they are several $100s. But if you just consider which each component is, you can kind of assemble your own. All of this stuff here cost me a little bit over $100, and we'll just start here with our scavenge pump. We got a little bit of hose to run the oil through. And with this hose kit came a bunch of different 10AN style fittings. They're at different angles. We've got a few straight ones in here as well. So no matter how we have to run this in the engine bay, we should be able to do so in a really clean fashion. And then my good friend Jared Pink told me that we're going to want an inline reservoir. So I found this fuel filter kit. I pulled the filter out of this little cup here, and right there is going to be our little reservoir to run in line. This kit came with a nice bracket, so that should help us mount it somewhere safely. And last, we've just got a couple fittings. This is the one we're going to start with right here. Not a ton of room for more aftermarket stuff under here, so we got a lot of test fitting ahead of us. We're going to pop off this panel right here, pop on a few of those fittings, run some lines. Before we do that, I'm going to just pop open this pod. You hear that? That's aeration. Aeration is something you don't want in the oiling system of your car. But aeration goes quite well with hydration. This is AirUp, the new school way to enjoy flavored water through scent. Just fill your AirUp bottle with water, pop on your favorite flavor pod, then pop it up. And when you take a sip, get ready for an amazing, all-natural flavored experience without the sugar or calories. This is such a cool little innovation that makes a huge difference. And since each flavor pod lasts well over a gallon's worth of water, I find myself driving right past the convenience store, in turn saving me a lot of time, but also a lot of money. And to save even more, all you got to do is hit the link in the description box where you can get up to 30% off AirUp's limited edition bundles. Grab a bottle, maybe grab a couple for gifts. At the same time, you could try a variety of different flavor pods. Find out the one that suits you best. My favorite is the iced tea peach because it has a classic iced tea flavor, but since there's no caffeine, I can drink it as much as I want and still fall asleep at night. Again, hit that link in the description so next time you drink up, you air up. We're going to start by just disconnecting our oil exit line right here. On our first step, we're already having to make a little modification because the screws that came with this adapter here are just too small to fit in our turbo. They're the wrong size. So we're going to use the original bolts, but we've got to bore these holes out on the side. Woohoo! Got a little piece on my code. Now our fitting is ready to be installed. We just got to make sure that our gasket stays in place. With our initial steps complete, we just had to mock everything up. The lower engine cover quickly became the home to a lot of these different components, as there are a few sections that provide ample room for us to stash the pump and reservoir. As we would find the best place and best position for each part, we started measuring and cutting hose and then just continued test fitting. We ran into a few small problems, like our AN fittings running into the housing of the pump, but this sort of stuff was easy and quick to fix. All right, I think we've got a workable setup. Now everything is still loose, and at this point we've got enough room to be able to move them just a little bit. But you can see the line that runs off the turbo is going into our tank here. We've got angled fittings on both sides so we can make sure it does not hit that exhaust pipe. And the tank is small enough that it's not going to run up against the sway bar or our intercooler piping here. Then off of the tank, you can see that hose right there is running to the scavenge pump back here. Again, super loose right now, but this is a perfect amount of space for this, and it gives us great access to the exit port, which is then going to run over here. Now we're still waiting one last fitting that's going to convert this port into a 10AN fitting. We've converted the whole system to 10AN, and I think it was running a 6 or an 8 before, so that increased flow is going to help this thing drain a bit better as well. When we finally installed our final port, it was sitting a bit too low, and at the angle at which our hose connected to it was too straight, causing a small kink in our line. So we ordered and installed a right angle fitting, which was much better, but where it bottomed out in the engine, it was pointed at the exact opposite direction of our flow. This wasn't a big deal because in our fitting kit was a U-shaped connector that was made exactly for this situation. The only last thing we need in order for our pump to move some oil is power. Now I thought this was going to be a bit tricky since all the electronics are in the cabin and our battery is in the front, but when we pulled open the engine panel, we found a little port there which is always on power. That made our life a lot easier. So we ran this cable here all the way to an inline fuse holder so that it's protected. Since our power source is constant, we can't run it straight to the pump, otherwise it will run all the time, even when the car is off we need to run it to a relay. That way we can control when to turn the pump on and off. And we've got the perfect solution right here. This is a 5-prong relay that connects to a waterproof wiring harness. This cost only $5, and it's an amazing solution because we can strip these wires back, use some waterproof wire connectors. We'll just hook it up to power and ground, and then we'll grab a signal off of the coolant pump, which is part of our aftermarket turbo kit. It comes on when you turn the accessory power to the car on, which is perfect. We are all wired up. That was super straightforward and a perfect solution for this setup. Now, when we put our key in the ignition and we turn it, we should hear, yep, that's it right there. That pump is a bit noisy. It'll be interesting to see what it sounds like when we fire the engine over. You got to think of where it's sitting in relation to the engine. I mean, they're right next to each other, and this has a straight back exhaust. It's a pretty noisy car, so I'm pretty sure it's going to drown it out once we fire it over, which we are ready for now. Our first official test run with the engine on. What we want to see, number one, is no oil leaks. No more oil messes from this Porsche. I'm going to set a tarp down before we actually start it as an insurance policy. But number two, we just want to make sure that this pump remains on during the entire duration of the engine running and that it never goes out, it never hiccups. And then we should be good. We should have a functional car with no more smoke. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. While we're running here, the good thing is we're not leaking any oil. The bad news is we got a check engine light on the dashboard. Has to be related to something we just messed with, so I'm just going to do a quick code scan here. Since I've had this car, I've never seen it with a solid check engine light, just the flashing one. So before I pulled up our trouble codes, I pulled up a misfire counter. You can see here that all cylinders are reading 0, so things should be running all right. But when I pulled up the codes, I got 2 for both primary oxygen sensors. Now, just like fouled spark plugs, the same thing can happen to our O2 sensors, and it makes sense that these could have been ruined while our engine was ingesting all of the oil. When we pulled the sensors out, they were dark, just like our plugs, and these were priced a bit more Porsche-like at around $100 each. I didn't bother to replace the secondary ones since we didn't have a code for them, but also since this car doesn't have cats, these could very well be disabled in the aftermarket tune. I'm not really entirely sure here, so let me know what you think down in the comments. After clearing our codes, I restarted the car and let it run twice, and the light didn't return, so that seemed to have done the trick. In the case there is any more residual junk hiding around this engine, I did a quick solvent cleaning by pouring a bottle of this chemical very slowly straight into the intake port, while Mike was giving the car a little light throttle to keep it from stalling. You can see a lot of junk being burned up here. I'm really hopeful that this pump setup is going to be our long-term solution to get this Porsche engine running right and restore the power that we lost from it running rich all the time between our foul plugs, sensors, and it just burning oil. And I really got to thank you guys for that because you nailed it in the comments. I got a ton of messages from you letting me know that we really need to install this pump because of the placement of this turbo. Well, what's so crazy about this, and I know I've mentioned the number a countless amount of times, but this is a $12,000 turbo kit. And when you reach out to the company about this problem, it's like they don't even acknowledge it exists. But if you look in the forums, there are a countless amount of people running Caymans and 911s with this same setup, and there's constant talk about rebuilding turbos. There's one guy who claims to have blown through 3 sets of seals and bearings. There's another one who says that his started smoking just 1,000 miles after install. And I specifically exchanged emails with, again, the company that makes the kit. And one of the responses from them was, why are you rebuilding the turbo? The seals are dynamic. Even if the seals are dynamic, the placement of the turbo is so low, it seems to warrant the addition of this pump, and also just the fact that so many other people are experiencing the same issue. Now, in my opinion, this seems like an opportunity for them. Sell them a pump kit as an upgrade. Somebody's already spending 12 grand on a turbo kit. What's another 1,000 to them to make sure that it's working right? But here's another strange thing. If you call the company to get your turbo rebuilt, if you take it off the car yourself and ship it to them, they want $1,200 to do what we we did in a couple hours with a $22 kit. So again, I don't want to cast too many judgments because maybe they do it more professionally. I know a lot of you guys didn't like the fact that I didn't have the turbo balance afterward, but I still can't find the value in a $12,000 turbo kit that smokes shortly after installation, or a $1,200 turbo rebuild, even if you get it balanced. Either way, our turbo Cayman is almost ready to hit the road, and we've only spent around $400 to $500 between some of those parts that we put into it. So we're doing really good as far as the budget goes, but there's one more upgrade it is in dire need of, and that's in the suspension department. This car has lowering springs on stock shocks, and the base Cayman came with a bit of a softer damper compared to the S, and at this point there's probably tens of thousands of miles on the suspension. It is worn out and it's like riding in something wooden. Whether we go with a set of OE style dampers or a coilover setup, it's going to greatly enhance the way the car rides and handles, which is the whole reason you buy a Porsche. Now hopefully the weather is a little bit better when we take it out for its first test drive, but if you have any suggestions on how we should handle this suspension upgrade, let me know down in the comments. Also, if you're not already following me on Instagram, where I'm posting updates to the Porsche project and also new projects before they go live here, well, just follow me or hit that link down in the description. Guys, can't thank each and every one of you enough for watching today. I'll catch you very soon.